Hello and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. Here's a look at some of the stories we've been following for you today. President Biden is meeting with key senators today to discuss his Supreme Court pick. This as he faces both support and criticism for promising to name a black woman. Alaska Governor Mike Dunleavey is in Washington for a meeting with governors across the country and President Biden. He gives us a window into those meetings, as well as how Alaska has been dealing with the pandemic and other challenges facing the last frontier. FBI Director Christopher Wray says that no other country in the world poses as big of a threat as does communist China. He explained why at an event on Monday. President Biden today met with top senators who will oversee the confirmation of his Supreme Court pick. Biden says he wants inputs from both parties, but some Republicans are firing back. Here's NTD's Iris Tao with more on that.
I invited, we're different parties, but two good friends down here.
That's President Biden at his first formal meeting with lawmakers to discuss who's filling Justice Breyer's seat.
And I'm serious when I say it, that I want the advice of the Senate as well as the consent, if we can arrive on who the nominee should be.
Speaking to reporters, Biden said Judiciary Chairman Dick Durbin and the top Republican on the panel, Senator Chuck Grassley, are two good friends. But despite the push for bipartisan support, Republican Senator Ted Cruz on Tuesday doubled down on his criticism.
The Democrats are so casually racist.
He says Biden's vow to only consider black women is offensive to them.
There are black women who are very talented jurists who may well be the appropriate nominee, but when Biden starts out by saying he has a quota system, he diminishes the achievements of those African-American women.
The White House fires back.
The fact that not a single black woman has served on the Supreme Court is a failure in the process, not a failure or a lack of qualified black women to serve as Supreme Court justices.
This as Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer on Tuesday promised.
And once President Biden announces his nominee, I intend to have the Senate move quickly.
Biden made clear again that he will pick his nominee by the end of February. Iris Tao, NTD News.
Governors from all 50 states were invited to Washington to meet President Biden yesterday. Today we had a chance to speak with Governor Mike Dunleavey of Alaska to find out how those meetings went. Governor, thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report.
It's great to be here, Steve. Thank you.
Now, Governor, you're in town for a big meeting. Governors from all over the country have come to meet with President Biden. You met with him yesterday. What was the consensus? Was there a consensus?
I didn't pick up there was a consensus. There's a consensus amongst the governors, not just Republicans, but most of the Democrats, that we've got to start really putting this virus behind us. And that doesn't mean just ignoring the health implications, but the idea that we're going to live in a constant state of fear, a constant state of emergency, a constant state of disaster, I think most governors by far see the danger in that, and I've seen the danger in that for some time. We in Alaska have never had a mask mandate or a vaccine mandate. We've moved beyond the virus some time ago. But, you know, it's interesting when you come down to Washington from Alaska, everyone's wearing a mask, you're stopped and you have to put your mask on. There's questions about whether you have a vaccine. It's a very different world than most of the states that I'm familiar with. But as I mentioned, even your Democratic governors now are saying it's time to move on, and it's way past time to move on.
Now, when it does come to the mandates, Alaska, last I checked, was right around 1,000 total deaths, which is significantly low when you look at the country overall. How do you interpret the one-size-fits-all policies that the mandates have come down on the country? We're
50 individual states and a handful of territories. And we have to manage this virus in a manner that really is unique to each state. Alaska is detached from the rest of the country. We have a large country between us and the lower 48, Canada. We do a lot of flying in Alaska. We have a lot of remote villages. We took an Alaskan approach to dealing with this virus early on. First 2 months back in 2020 when we didn't understand what was going on, we asked people to stay away from each other. We're waiting for the vaccines to occur in the hopes that those vaccines would help. But in the end, each state has to chart their own course. And for Alaska, as you mentioned, we have the second lowest death numbers in the country after Vermont. We have the highest survivability rate, which is a statistic rarely talked about. In other words, if you got infected in Alaska, your chance of surviving is greater than any other state. And we went about beefing up our healthcare systems, bringing in additional workers to cover for those folks that were fatigued. But in the end, we're going to look back, and the history will write that the states that really embraced not just the healthcare aspect of it, but make sure that the individual freedoms were followed, I think will come out as winners.
Now, Governor, when people look at Alaska, it's obviously through the photos. It's a gorgeous state. Tourism is a huge part of the industry there, but so is energy production. You issued a statement that you were concerned that the Biden may take steps to further hurt that industry in Alaska by, not allowing drilling on certain resources. Can you tell us about how this will affect real people in the Alaskan people that you represent?
Alaska is a resource state. We were purchased from the Russians by William Seward for the purpose of the resources in our location on the globe. We are an oil giant. We're a gas giant. We have the largest national forest in the country. We have 1/7 of the country's timber. We have most of the rare earths and elements, most of our strategic metals. All of these resources can be brought to bear on helping the United States become secure in its national security, also providing jobs, lowering the cost of energy. We had this opportunity under the previous administration, the Trump administration. President Trump worked very well with Alaska in opening up these opportunities. This administration is doing everything it can to kill these opportunities. And quite frankly, Steve, it makes no sense at all, right? Because if you close down oil and gas in America, including Alaska, you're just going to push it overseas where you have less environmental regulations to protect the environment. We ship jobs overseas, we ship our wealth overseas, but we ship our national security overseas to characters that aren't necessarily our friends. It makes no sense, and we're standing up to the Biden administration. We filed lawsuits. We feel this is literally a life and death struggle for resource development in the country, including Alaska.
Now, why do you think they're doing this? And if you could just elaborate a little bit more on the national security implications.
I don't know why they're doing it, because just looking at it from a jobs perspective makes no sense. Protecting the environment makes no sense. We do it better in Alaska to protect the environment than any other place on the planet, yet they want to ship this over to a place like Russia or South America or Africa where there are no environmental regulations. But really, when you get down to national security, nobody's been able to tell me how relying on the Russians or the Saudis helps us with our national security. It makes no sense at all. We're an energy giant here in America, here in Alaska. We should take advantage of that. We should make sure that we're secure with our energy so we don't have to rely on others. You see what's happening now in Europe with this Ukraine-Russian issue. And there's no reason to put America at such a disadvantage. It makes no sense at all.
Alaska Governor Mike Dunleavy, thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Lawmakers on Capitol Hill did not miss out on the economic boom of 2021. Members of Congress bought and sold an estimated $355 million worth of stocks last year, according to a newly released study by MarketWatch. U.S. representatives and senators or their immediate family bought around $180 million and sold around $175 million worth of company shares in 2021. Topping the list is Texas Congressman Michael McCaul with about $66 million in transactions, and California Representative Ro Khanna with about $53 million in transactions. Nancy Pelosi came in 8th with $12 million in transactions, all buys and no sells for the Speaker in 2021. Stock trading by members of Congress has faced scrutiny over the years. Questions exist over whether lawmakers are using privileged information for an unfair advantage. FBI Director Christopher Wray says that the threat from the Chinese Communist regime is more brazen and damaging than ever before. On Monday, Wray told an audience at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation that the Chinese regime steals, quote, staggering volumes of information and causes deep, job-destroying damage across a wide range of industries. He said no other country poses a bigger threat to America's innovation and economic security due to theft of information and technology.
I do want to be clear that the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party pose the threat we're focused on countering. Not the Chinese people, and certainly not Chinese Americans, who are themselves frequently victims of the Chinese government's lawless aggression.
He said the threat to the West from the Chinese regime is more brazen and damaging than ever before. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle are unified in recognizing the serious threat China poses to human rights and America's economy. Congress this week is gearing up to pass a bill meant to hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable for its human rights abuses. But one Republican wants to go even further. Representative Steve Chabot of Ohio today proposed levying sanctions to prevent forced organ harvesting from Falun Dafa practitioners. And Senator Jon Tester tells NTD he's expecting the bill to pass after a genuine bipartisan discussion on this critical issue. NTD's Melina Wisecup has more.
The House this week is starting work on a new competition bill meant to boost American innovation and help us with global competitiveness, particularly competition with China. The Senate already passed their version of the bill, and now senators are pushing House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to move quickly to get it done. On Tuesday, Senator Raphael Warnock sent a letter to Speaker Pelosi, writing that the effort will increase resilience in America's supply chains while decreasing resilience on other countries. The House today getting started.
I think the subject of today's hearing is such that we can move together in a process that we haven't seen much lately.
And it goes further than economic initiatives. It takes action to address human rights. It would impose sanctions for human rights abuses of Uyghurs in Xinjiang. But one Republican representative is pushing for more.
To levying sanctions for involuntary organ harvesting from the Falun Gong.
Falun Gong is a spiritual practice that has faced brutal persecution in China since 1999. And Chabot hopes this new bill will provide the occasion to consider stronger actions to hold the CCP accountable for its human rights atrocities.
Tough policies like these ought to be included.
The Competes bill also invests money into Hong Kong, $10 million to promote democracy. Unlike the Senate version of the bill, the Competes Act invests in climate change.
Melina, there's been some pushback from Republicans on this bill because they say it isn't strong enough. Representative Jim Banks said that this bill concedes to China instead of standing up to them. So, Melina, what's this pushback all about?
Well, some Republicans are concerned that this bill doesn't go far enough to crack down on agents of the Chinese Communist Party who are involved with stealing American intellectual property. And we know that has been an ongoing issue in our universities. I spoke with Senator Jon Tester earlier, a Democrat senator, who said that this is an issue that does need to be addressed and taken care of, but he's not picky about where it's addressed. Here's some of that exchange.
Yes, I think it's very relevant.
You think it should be in this bill?
I am not a stickler for turf. If we can get it addressed, if it has to be addressed in this bill, go ahead and do it.
And the House version of the bill is expected to pass quickly in the Democrat-controlled House, and then it will have to be reconciled with the Senate version. Democrats are really hoping this process will move quickly so that Biden will have an accomplishment to speak about at his State of the Union address come March 1st. Steve, back to you.
Thanks for that, Melina. And coming up, as the Ukraine crisis deepens, Secretary Antony Blinken talks again with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. We take a look if there's any progress on this front. And 7 U.S. governors are opposing the COVID vaccine mandates for their National Guardsmen. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin weighs in, and we have his response. Virginia Attorney General Jason Miyares issued a legal opinion on vaccine mandates. This resulted in a few Virginia universities making a major shift in their vaccine policy. Hello and welcome back to NTD's Capital Report. As the tension over Ukraine is at an all-time high, top U.S. and Russian diplomats spoke on a call today. The State Department said it's to follow up on the U.S. written response to Russia's security proposals.
The Secretary made clear to Foreign Minister Lavrov, as he has before, that we are prepared to engage in serious diplomacy with the Russian Federation on a reciprocal basis.
According to the State Department, Secretary Blinken spoke over the phone with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Tuesday. Blinken emphasized the U.S.'s willingness to continue a substantive exchange with Russia. He also urged Russian de-escalation and emphasized that further invasion of Ukraine would be met with swift and severe consequences. President Putin said today that the U.S. and its allies have ignored Russia's top security demands, but added that Moscow is still open for more talks. The Kremlin is seeking legally binding guarantees from the U.S. and NATO that Ukraine will never join NATO, but those requests were denied by the U.S. and NATO allies. Congress is expected to open debate on a sweeping sanctions bill against Russia this week. Lawmakers largely agree on the need to signal U.S. resolve for supporting Ukraine. Today, a group of Senate Democrats released a draft of their legislation to reform an 1887 election law that was highlighted in the wake of the 2020 election. The bill, named the Electoral Count Modernization Act, is drafted by Senators Angus King, Amy Klobuchar, and Dick Durbin. The senators said the bill serves as a foundational outline for key reforms to update the 1887 law. It aims to clarify that the vice president's role is ceremonial in overseeing the formal counting of the Electoral College vote. The proposal comes in response to the 2020 election and the question of whether a vice president had the power to overturn election results. But some experts argue that the original Electoral Count Act already implies the ceremonial nature of the vice president's role, and that Mike Pence did not have the power to overturn the 2020 election had he attempted to. Right now, another bipartisan group led by Senators Susan Collins and Joe Manchin are working on their own proposal to reform the Electoral Count Act. Democratic Senator Joe Manchin is being guarded by security. He was recently seen walking the halls of Congress, followed by what appeared to be a private security detail. The moderate Democratic senator has become a focal point for protesters unhappy with his positions on climate change, the filibuster, and Biden's Build Back Better plan. Campaign filings show that Manchin spent over $75,000 to hire private security after he and his family received threats in Washington, D.C., and also at his home in the state of West Virginia. With companies and schools dropping the vaccine mandate, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin just reaffirmed the mandate for the military, including the National Guard. Secretary Austin dismissed 7 Republican governors' objections to the National Guard vaccine mandate. Austin wrote in a letter that governors' concerns do not negate the need for the important military readiness requirement. Governors of these 7 states publicly opposed the mandate in December. The governors of Texas and Alaska also filed suit against the National Guard vaccine mandate. So far, more than 500 U.S. active duty service members have been discharged over the vaccine mandates. Recently, I had an interview with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. about these vaccine mandates. Kennedy is an attorney and son of the United States Senator Robert F. Kennedy and the nephew of President John F. Kennedy. Let's take a look.
What's happening in our country, the cruelty of the mandates, the irrationality of the mandates, the violation of all of our traditional values in this country, and ultimately our humanity. Now, that doesn't mean that, vaccines are always worthless, but what it means is you have to carefully assess the risk from the disease and the risk from the vaccine, and you have to make a cost-benefit analysis, and that is really the basic problem here. There was never any scientific citation. There was never any democratic process of PCR tests using them at amplifications 3 or 4 times what they should have been used at, or more. We saw manipulation of death certificates. All of these things to exaggerate fears of the illness, and then to minimize public knowledge about the risk from vaccination.
Navy Secretary Carlos Del Toro has tested positive for the CCP virus. Del Toro said in a statement he returned from official travel last Friday afternoon. He says he's fully vaccinated and received a booster shot in October. He will quarantine for the next 5 days. A growing number of high-ranking military officials have tested positive for the CCP virus this month, including Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. On Friday, Virginia Attorney General Jason Miyares issued a legal opinion that state colleges and universities could not mandate COVID-19 vaccines for student enrollment. He added that the Virginia Assembly could pass a law requiring the vaccine, but it has not done so. University of Virginia, Virginia Tech, and George Mason have dropped their mandates. The George Mason website reads, quote, "We will now strongly encourage vaccination protocols for all Mason students, faculty, and staff, though we no longer require them." Back in July, a George Mason newsletter had stated that students would incur a late fee for not submitting their vaccination cards on time. It additionally stated non-compliance could result in a referral to student conduct. Mason's dropping the mandate represents a big shift from their previous policy. Washington, D.C. released local guidelines which ask those isolating for COVID-19 to have a negative test result before ending quarantine. On a call with D.C. council members, local city officials remarked that the guidance is stricter than those issued by the CDC, which only asks for 5 full days of isolation. DC's guidance also states that individuals should continue to wear masks around others for an additional 5 days, even after a negative COVID-19 antigen test. The guidance says that a negative COVID-19 test is not a guarantee that you are, quote, not infectious to others, so continuing to wear a mask is essential, end quote. And that's all we have for you tonight on the Capitol Report. Thank you for tuning in. From Washington, D.C., I'm Steve Lance, and we'll see you tomorrow.